So this project is a bracelet. It's going to be a motif of leaves, sterling silver leaves with some 18-karat wires, and they're a little bit puffed out and kind of chased and repoussé. So these are my concept drawings, and I figured out that it needs to be about almost 7 inches, 6 3/4 inches, and so here's what I've done. I figured out my linkage length where there's the bezel and some jump rings and connecting points to the leaves, and I've cut out some leaves from the sterling silver. I used 20 gauge sheet. Got my Peridot set up. They're not set yet. They'll be set after the construction is done, and it should be pretty great, oxidized with gold accents. So I'm at the point where I'm assembling my little settings to put the Peridot in, and I need linkage to put the leaves and the Peridot together. So I've decided to put little U shapes on either side of my bezel in sterling silver. I could have used round jump rings. I decided I didn't like the look of that. It was too round. I like U's. I'm using U's. Now, so I've got one of my bezels here. I've put boric acid on it and some flux, and I'm heating it. But here's my little U. Got it in tweezers. I'm going to go over here and pick up some solder. And this is hard solder. I don't use hard solder for very much, actually, but since I'm later going to put some gold jump rings on top of the bezels so that the stone appears to be set in gold, I have a later soldering operation on these little bezels with the linkage. So I want to use the hard solder, so later I can solder with medium solder. So I'm just put some solder on the ends. And I'm going to heat up the bezel with my kind of bushy flame. Keep it moving. This little U will melt very fast if it sits in the flame, but it takes time to heat up the bezel. So we're going to get it warm, and then we're going to set this right where we want it and hold it in place. And until the solder flows, and there it has flowed. Take the heat off, let it cool a second, and then take your pliers off. Now, how are we going to do the other side? Oh, we're going to move it. And let the tweezers be a heat sink to separate the one I just soldered on from the one I'm going to solder on. If you do it, you know, quickly enough, it won't fall off the bottom. Well, it might. It shouldn't, though. Because the tweezers are in between, and that's going to draw a lot of the heat. So the bottom, where the when I just soldered on, shouldn't get as hot. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go pick up some solder on my little U's. You could just pre-flow the solder or place the solder on the bezel, but I just chose to do it this way. Heat the bezel, and then bring the U in so that it doesn't overheat. Try to make sure I've got it, oops, dropped some solder, go get some more. Always have more cut than you need. Try to make sure it's a nice opposition and not off-center. It's kind of an eyeball thing. And then just come in here. Reposition my tweezers so my hand was hot. Now, just gently heat it until it flows. Now, move that flame around so you don't overheat something. You should be able to see that solder flow any second. Oh, there it goes. Okay, so I said I was going to add some gold trim rings to the top of my bezels so that the Peridot will have a nice gold bezel look like that. But then I've saved material by using sterling for the rest of it. Okay. Since I've already soldered on these little U-shaped connectors, I don't want them to move if I accidentally overheat a piece of this. So I push this down into a charcoal block so that it's nice and, you know, set in there. So if something loosens, the solder flows, the connectors won't just fall off. So that's just a little support. And I put some flux right on that rim, and I'm going to put some solder right on that rim. If I'm very lucky, I actually do better with a solder pick, so we're going to do it that way. Maybe a little piece of solder. Okay. Flux always puffs up. Some solder right there. There. Then I'm going to heat it up enough to flow it a little bit with medium silver solder. Beside there, it flowed. Okay, so now I'm going to take my ring, which I'm going to dip in some flux. I'm going to place it on top. Let that flux bubble up a little bit. And it kind of gets raised up, but it'll settle back down. And before the solder flows, I'll make sure I've positioned it right where I want it. A little off, so the solder needs to, the flux needs to get a little bit glassy, then you can move it around. Then continue to heat, moving the torch so you don't overheat one area until that solder flows. Let's see if we can see it flow. Gold and silver like to melt into each other, so you try real hard not to overheat this. I see it starting to do so, so let's see what we have. Can't tell if I've got a good seam there. But the other side started to sink a little bit, so that's bad. So let's not heat that side anymore. Went the wrong direction. Push it up onto the... Okay, that should do it. Okay, I've got the gold bezel tops soldered on, and I'm just going to clean up and detail these little bezel settings. They're the Peridot are going to go. They're going to link to the leaves. So I have to seat the stones. First clean them up, get them all polished, seat the stones, thin the tops, and then set them. I've got the Peridot rough set. They're not tidied up or anything, but they are set. At this point, with this bracelet, I've cut out the leaves, the shapes I want for the leaves out of sterling silver, and I want to make them dimensional. So I'm going to do two stages. I'm going to form them in this little wooden block first, and then I'm going to, that'll be from the back side, and then from the front side I'll do a little bit of chasing, which will form the center of the leaf. But for this, I'm just going to take a wooden tool that's in a little concave place in this wood, and I'm going to just pound it in. This wooden tool doesn't leave tool marks, which is nice. I don't have, it's a gentle shape, so I don't have to be too aggressive with bending. I just want to get it forming a little bit. You can grind your own pieces of wood. Like this has been custom shapes for all different projects, and you can do that with any piece of wood. There. Now I'm ready for the next phase, which will be to shape from the front. Okay, so I've contoured these out from the back with the wooden tool, and now I want to put a recess in the front that looks like the vein of the leaf. And I'm going to ultimately put some gold wire over that, but to get it to bend how I want it, which is approximately like this, I am going to put a line with a burr so that when it's like scoring it, so that when I do this repoussé part, it's going to bend exactly where I want it to. So I'm going to just go along my line here and put a score line where I've drawn my marker. And you'll see on the next step how this makes this step a whole heck of a lot easier. Yeah, that's pretty good. I'm heating up the pitch in my pitch bowl so I can put my silver leaves in it, and then I can support the work when I hammer on it. This is softening up the pitch a little bit. Got my Peridot set. They're not cleaned up yet, but they're set, and they have their little attachments on the side so that they can link to the leaves. Now the leaves, as we know, I have formed because I want them to have some dimension and a little bit of curve and some grace. So I've formed them in a pitch bowl, and then I annealed them and put them into the warm pitch, and then hammered from the front, and then took them out and put them back in the warm pitch, let it cool, and then hammered from the back. And I did that a couple times to create this contour where it's got some dimension and volume like a leaf might have. Of course, this is a fictional leaf, but I wanted it to have some volume. So how I'm going to clean these up is with a sanding disc. These sanding discs go on a little mandrel, and they have sanding on one side and paper on the other. And I use them with the sanding surface toward my hand. That's how I prefer to use them. Use them otherwise. As long as you keep your strokes nice and long so you don't put a divot in one place, this will really eat up your work. And you can see I'm making nice long strokes, covering the surface right down to my little groove. And you can see from the reflection of the light, how the light hits it, whether you're actually getting it smoothed out the way you want. But I have a lot of thickness in the silver, so there's plenty of room to do this and not worry about getting it too thin. This little spot up there. That doesn't look too bad. So you can see the difference in the surface now. I have sort of the bumpy, undulating side, and I have the somewhat smoothed out side. I'm going to just rub it on here now, and I can see, once I do this, that I've got my elevations pretty consistent throughout this side of the leaf. I see a little bit of a divot there and there that I can go back in and do, but you can see how it's got a nice smoothness. Now if you look on this side, and I run the sandpaper over it, see how highs and lows are making it so that the sandpaper isn't getting to the whole surface. That's why you go in with something else, like a file or an emery stick, or in this case a sanding disc, and take off more material until you get the surface down to something much nicer and smoother. So you can see how smooth that's getting. This would take a lot of work by hand, but you could do it by hand too. Okay, I've pretty much got these where I want them to be at this stage. Now I'm going to take them to the buffing machine and get this surface all nice and smooth and buffed. I've got the leaves contoured and pillowed and chased and repoussed in the manner I like. I've put on some heavy gauge wire that's going to form into the link that links to the Peridot. And I've left those unbent so that I can adjust the size perfectly later. And so this wire is going to go and contour and follow the contour like that. But I don't like the round wire as well as I think I would like a little bit of a flat wire. So we're going to go over to the rolling mill and roll this down a little bit. It has adjustable rollers, flat rollers, and over here you could roll wire. We're going to use the flat one because I want to just flatten this wire a little bit. So I'm going to adjust the roller distance to flatten. I'm going to test the amount of flatness, and I kind of like maybe a little bit less than that. Try that. A little bit less. Okay, I like that better. Okay, so I'm just going to roll the whole piece through. And it'll come out the other side flatter. And a little bit longer because it's been compressed, and that's good. It's a good way to conserve material. Change its dimension. It's actually going to look like more gold because it's going to be wider, but it's actually going to be a hair less gold. Isn't that interesting? So now I will gently, with some pliers, bend this to fit. And I have set this up in a manner that I hope will support the ends, the wires that are soldered on with hard solder. They're supported into this charcoal block, and I'm using some tweezers to hold the 18 karat gold wire on there. I've already contoured it to match, and so I think this is pretty stable. I'm using medium solder, so hopefully I'm not gonna melt anything that I don't want to. Now, the gold and the silver, if it gets too hot, they're going to melt into each other and not adequately solder. They'll just destroy my work. So I want to be real careful with the heat control. I'm going to take some solder and put it up here where I want it. You could do this a whole lot of different ways, of course.
That's a trick.
Stay right there. Okay. And then get a few more pieces, and it's going to hopefully flow like capillary action underneath the wire. Maybe 3 pieces would be good. Oh, there's a big piece. Okay, now I've got solder. I've got kind of a bigger, bushier flame. I'm just going to heat the whole piece all over. And see what happens. Come around the back side a little bit. Heat it from different angles. And don't blow your torch out like I am. Okay. Here we go. Keeping the flame moving. I have some tweezers at the ready. If I need to reposition something or squeeze, like the wire starting to kind of lift off. Now over here, so I'm going to switch over to this end. Got everything coming up to temperature at the same time. Okay, I see the solder ready to go. I'm going to shift my flame up a little bit on top, coming from the top, so that it doesn't jump onto the wire quite so readily. Because the solder will follow the heat. Now it's starting to go. Okay, it's melting. It's doing what I want. It's going under the gold. And it's adhered over there. And I'm going to slide over to this end. I see that my wire has separated, so I just squeezed it back on, and it's real flexible right now, and it's going to just do what I want it to do. Oh, there it goes. Did you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now it's off on this. The wire's not quite in good contact over here, so I'm going to kind of squeeze it down and see if I can get that capillary action to go hold it down better. See if we can get that to heat up again, get it all up to temperature, and flow it down to the end by drawing the heat down. And there it went. Okay, got it. I think I've got solder flow from end to end. Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Let it cool. Do that for all of them. If for some reason your solder didn't flow all the way and you've got a little gap, stop, let it cool, pickle it for a while. Then it's going to be really nice and malleable, so you can squeeze that wire down on, tap it down on with a hammer, and get it to conform to your leaf better, and then reflow your solder. We're now on to some of the finishing parts of this bracelet, and the client did want some sort of leafy vein detailing, so I opted for something fairly gestural, not too deep, so that when I oxidize it, it's going to be not the prominent feature. It'll be a little more suggestive. So I'm going to do that on this last one so you can see how I did it. I just used a setting burr with the kind of like a heart burr, and I just carefully bracing my hands together, lightly went in and did some kind of gestural lines that will make us think of a leaf. And a little bit of intersecting line as well, just to get a little more movement there. So, okay. The next thing will be to hook them all together, tack the rings shut. I'm going to use the puck welder. We can do that next. And then oxidize and detail and finish, and it'll be all done. I have these links bent around the Peridot links, so the leaf link wire bends around the Peridot link wire, but it's an open joint, which is not as secure. So that they cannot pull open in the future, you want to solder them shut. So I fortunately have a puck welder, which is a little baby TIG welder, and I can do this while my gemstones are set. Now, if you don't have that, which most people don't, or a laser welder, then you would need to solder these shut before you set your gemstones, because the Peridot cannot take that heat. So I've already got them set, so I'm going to use this method, but most people would have to solder these, do all of their fabrication before they set their gems, and then go back and set set their Peridot or their gems, unless they're diamonds or rubies or sapphires. So now I'm just going to set this up and come in with a little silver wire and a little puck action, and kind of get this puck together. I know it seems like my fingers are awfully close, but it's just kind of that machine. You don't have to be too concerned about your fingers if you know where they are at all times. I'm getting some liver of sulfur ready. This is a liquid liver of sulfur. Some hot water to this. You need really hot water. Nice hot water. You can use the stuff that comes in chunks. Now I'm going to just immerse the whole bracelet. You can see it's turning already. Everything but the gold will turn black. You want to do this with some ventilation. We have a fan on up above us. And I'm going to rinse it and then do it again. Okay, so I put the liver of sulfur on here, and it's turned everything except the gold pretty dark. So we'll leave the back, but the front needs to be lightened up. And so I just do it with some Scotch-Brite and going in one direction. Just kind of take off the amount I want to take off so that the detail shines through better. I think I'll leave the links dark. That looks pretty. The Peridot links, that linkage. But I want to get some of this off the leaves and lighten it up. And then the matte finish on the 18 karat gold is pretty, and it gives a good contrast. So here's the finished product with the oxidation, which really kind of makes the contrast between the silver and the gold be a little nicer, and you can see a little bit of light veining on the leaves. And here is the final project. I love how the oxidation makes the details pop and gives you the contrast with the gold, and the veins make a nice little suggestive leaf out of everything. I think she'll be really happy.